Niccolo Machiavelli understood something 5 centuries ago that you're still struggling to grasp. Power is not a birthright, it's a performance. The prince doesn't merely rule through force or bloodline. He rules through calculated presentation, through strategic opacity, through the architectural control of perception itself. And what you do in public, every gesture, every word, every moment of unguarded emotion, is either building your fortress or handing your enemies the battering ram. Most people move through public space like children wandering through a minefield, oblivious to the explosions they're triggering with every careless step. They think the world is neutral, that their actions don't accumulate, that tomorrow they can simply reset the board. They cannot. You cannot. Every public moment is a stone laid in the cathedral of your reputation, or a crack in its foundation. And you've been laying cracks. Let me be precise about what we're addressing here. This is not etiquette. This is not Victorian social anxiety about using the wrong fork. This is warfare conducted in conference rooms and coffee shops, in grocery store aisles and gym lobbies. This is the difference between those who shape their environment and those who are shaped by it. The weak believe public space is democratic, neutral ground where everyone gets to be themselves. The sovereign understands that public space is a battlefield where perception determines everything, where one unguarded moment can unravel years of careful construction. Society has sold you a beautiful lie dressed as liberation, that you should express yourself freely, that restraint is repression, that the mask is the enemy of the authentic self. And you bought it. You internalized it. You made it your religion. Meanwhile, those who understood Machiavelli's lessons, those who recognize that the appearance of virtue often serves better than virtue itself, have been quietly accumulating the power you think you're too pure to pursue. The tragedy isn't that you're losing. The tragedy is that you don't even realize there's a game being played. You're sitting at a poker table showing your cards and wondering why everyone keeps taking your chips. You're broadcasting your vulnerabilities like a wounded animal in predator territory and calling it authenticity. You're performing weakness and expecting strength to somehow emerge from the repetition. Here's what Machiavelli knew that the self-help industrial complex will never tell you. The world doesn't reward your inner journey. It rewards what it can see, measure, and predict about you. Your private growth means nothing if your public presence radiates incompetence. Your meditation practice is worthless if you still telegraph desperation in social situations. Your therapy insights are impotent if you continue making catastrophic strategic errors every time you leave your house. This isn't about becoming fake. This is about becoming dangerous. There's a profound difference between deception and discretion, between lying and strategic silence. The weak man lies because he's afraid of the truth. The sovereign withholds truth because he understands its weaponized value. You've been trained to confuse these categories, to believe that any form of concealment is moral failure. This confusion is precisely what keeps you weak. Let's establish the architecture of your current failure. You enter public space as if you're among friends, as if the default state of human interaction is benevolence, as if people aren't constantly calculating your value, your usefulness, your exploitability. This childlike trust isn't virtue, it's tactical incompetence. Every person you encounter is making judgments, filing observations, constructing a dossier on your weaknesses, whether they consciously intend to or not. And you're helping them. You're doing their reconnaissance work for them. The first catastrophic error, the original sin of social weakness, you display your emotions indiscriminately. Anger, frustration, anxiety, desperation. You wear them like badges of honesty. You think this makes you relatable. It makes you prey. When you show anger, you reveal your boundaries can be violated. When you display frustration, you announce your incompetence. When you broadcast anxiety, you invite exploitation. When you radiate desperation, you transform every interaction into an asymmetric negotiation where you've already lost. Machiavelli observed that everyone sees what you appear to be, few experience what you really are. Your mistake is believing this is cynicism. It's topology. It's the recognition that surface and depth operate by different laws, that what's visible and what's actual inhabit separate domains of power. The moment you collapse these categories, the moment you decide your public self should perfectly mirror your private chaos, you've surrendered the fundamental lever of human influence. Consider the predator. It doesn't advertise its hunger. It doesn't telegraph its intentions. It maintains perfect composure until the optimal moment for the kill. Now consider you in the grocery store, at the office, in the gym. How much of your internal state is leaking into your presentation? How many micro-expressions of weakness are you broadcasting per minute? You're not being authentic. You're being legible. You're making yourself easy to read, easy to predict, easy to manipulate. The second error compounds the first. You complain publicly. You vocalize your problems to people who lack the power or incentive to solve them. You think this is building connection. You're building a catalog of your vulnerabilities. Every complaint is an admission that something exceeded your capacity to handle it. Every vocalized frustration is data about what breaks you. And you're giving this intelligence away for free to people who will never respect you for it. The Stoics understood something the modern therapeutic culture has forgotten. The gap between stimulus and response is where sovereignty lives. When you complain, you're announcing that the stimulus was too strong, that the response was automatic, that you're a creature of reaction rather than deliberate action. You're positioning yourself as effect rather than cause. The sovereign doesn't complain because the sovereign is the source of pressure, not its victim. But you've been told that vulnerability is connection. You've been taught that sharing your struggles creates intimacy. And with your intimate circle, your chosen few, there's truth in this. But you've made the catastrophic error of applying intimate protocols to public space. You've confused the grocery store clerk with your therapist. You've mistaken your co-workers for your inner circle. You've treated strangers like confidants. This brings us to the third error. You seek validation from people with no stake in your success. You fish for compliments from those who gain nothing from your elevation. You require external confirmation for internal decisions. This isn't connection, it's begging. It's the transactional framing of interaction where you're always in deficit, always seeking permission, always looking for someone else to authorize your existence. Machiavelli wrote that the lion cannot protect himself from traps, and the fox cannot defend himself from wolves. One must therefore be a fox to recognize traps, and a lion to frighten wolves. You're neither. You're the deer frozen in headlights, broadcasting your location, waiting for something external to save you. The sovereign doesn't ask if his choice is correct. He makes it correct through execution. The validation comes after the conquest, not before. Watch the powerful in public space. Notice what they don't do. They don't explain themselves unless strategy demands it. They don't fill silence with nervous chatter. They don't rush to reassure others of their good intentions. They understand that explanation is the language of the subordinate, that justification is admission of vulnerability, that the need to be understood is the need to be approved by those whose approval means nothing. The fourth error is perhaps the most devastating. You display your desperation, your loneliness, your need. You think this makes you human. It makes you exploitable. Need is a hook that others will use to fish you into relationships, transactions, and obligations that serve their architecture, not yours. The moment you signal scarcity of attention, of connection, of opportunity, you've lowered your market value in every interaction that follows. The marketplace of human interaction operates by supply and demand like any other market. Abundance attracts. Scarcity sometimes attracts, but only when it's perceived as selectivity rather than inability. When you display desperation, you're not signaling scarcity, you're signaling malfunction. You're announcing that the basic economy of human exchange has somehow failed in your particular case, and this failure becomes the most interesting thing about you. Consider the architecture of attraction, of influence, of power. It's always built on the foundation of self-sufficiency. not the performance of not needing, the actual state of not needing validation, approval, or rescue from any particular source. This doesn't mean isolation, it means optionality. The sovereign has options, plural. The desperate has hope, singular. One is a position of strength, the other is a prayer. The fifth error reveals the depth of your social conditioning. You apologize reflexively for taking up space, for having needs, for existing with edges and boundaries. You've internalized the message that your presence is an imposition, so you spend energy preemptively managing others' comfort with your existence. This is slavery dressed as politeness. This is tactical surrender masquerading as consideration. Machiavelli observed that it's better to be feared than loved if you cannot be both. This shocks the modern sensibility which has been trained to believe that likability is the ultimate currency. But fear and respect occupy the same territory. Both recognize your capacity to affect outcomes, to enforce consequences, to be a force rather than a feature of the landscape. When you apologize for existing, you're announcing you're a feature, movable, removable, forgettable. The sovereign apologizes only when strategy demands it, when the appearance of humility serves a larger architecture of power. Every other apology is a confession that you've internalized someone else's frame, that you've accepted their judgment of your transgression, that you've subordinated yourself to their moral geometry. You're not being polite, you're being colonized. Here's what they don't tell you about public presentation. Every interaction is a negotiation of frame. Who defines the terms? Who sets the emotional temperature? Who determines what's acceptable and what requires apology? When you enter these negotiations already apologizing, you've conceded the entire field before the first move. You're playing defense from a position you didn't choose against rules you didn't write. The sixth error is subtler, but perhaps more corrosive. You explain yourself to those who haven't earned the explanation. You justify your choices to people with no authority over your life. You seek understanding from those who lack the context or capacity to understand. This isn't communication, it's prostration. It's the belief that if you can just make them see, if you can just explain thoroughly enough, they'll grant you the permission you're seeking. But the powerful don't explain. They declare, they implement, they move. Explanation is what the subordinate provides to the superior. Justification is what the accused provides to the judge. When you explain yourself without being asked, you're volunteering for these roles. You're establishing a hierarchy where you've already placed yourself beneath the person you're addressing. The Stoics taught self-sufficiency not as isolation, but as the foundation of all genuine relationship. You cannot enter exchanges as an equal if you need the other person's approval to validate your choices. You cannot negotiate from strength if you require their understanding to proceed. The sovereign's decisions are self-authorizing. He acts, then the world adjusts. You seek permission, then wait for the world to grant it. The seventh and final error synthesizes all the others. You treat public space as therapy, as a place to process, to work through, to figure out. You use strangers and acquaintances as unpaid emotional labor, as sounding boards for your unresolved interior chaos. You think this is being real. You're being strategically incompetent. You're outsourcing the hard work of internal resolution to people who have no interest in your development and every reason to use your weakness against you. Public space is performance space. It's the arena where you demonstrate the results of your private work, not where you conduct it. The gym is where you display strength built in training. The office is where you execute on strategies developed in solitude. Social interaction is where you present the finished product of your internal cultivation. When you collapse these categories, when you turn every interaction into a therapy session, you're not being vulnerable, you're being inefficient. Machiavelli's great insight was that the appearance of virtue serves the prince better than virtue itself in many contexts. This sounds cynical until you recognize the profound truth beneath it. The world responds to what it can see. Your private goodness, your interior journey, your sincere struggles, these are invisible to those making decisions about your value. What's visible is your competence, your composure, your capacity to be an asset rather than a liability. This doesn't mean abandoning authenticity. It means recognizing that authenticity has appropriate contexts. The intimate circle, the chosen few, the people who've earned access to your interior, these are the containers for vulnerability. Everyone else gets competence. Everyone else gets the polished presentation. Everyone else gets the version of you that serves your strategic interests. Think of it as concentric circles of disclosure. The innermost circle sees everything, your fears, your doubts, your unresolved traumas. The next circle sees your process, your work, your journey toward mastery. The outer circles see only the results, the presentation, the finished architecture. This isn't deception. It's strategic deployment of information based on relationship depth and mutual investment. The weak man collapses all circles into one. He treats everyone the same, offers the same level of access to everyone, makes himself equally available to all. He thinks this is integrity. It's indiscriminate distribution of power to those who haven't earned it and won't protect it. It's giving your adversaries the same intelligence you give your allies. It's strategic suicide dressed as moral virtue. So, what does the sovereign do in public? He maintains composure regardless of interior state. He speaks with precision, knowing every word is being weighed and filed. He displays only what serves his strategic interests. He treats every interaction as potential intelligence gathering on himself and others. He knows that power is accumulated in small moments of discretion, lost in small moments of indiscretion. The sovereign doesn't hide emotion. He controls when and how it's deployed. Anger becomes a tool used at specific moments for specific effects, not a reaction that hijacks him. Enthusiasm becomes a resource allocated to projects worthy of his energy, not a response given freely to every minor stimulus. Even vulnerability becomes weaponized, offered strategically to create specific bonds with specific people. This sounds exhausting. It should. The path to sovereignty is exhausting precisely because most people aren't willing to do this work. They'd rather be comfortable than powerful. They'd rather be authentic than strategic. They'd rather be liked than respected. And this is why they remain weak, remain exploitable, remain perpetually confused about why their good intentions don't translate to good outcomes. Machiavelli wrote for princes, for those willing to accept the burden of rule. Not everyone wants this burden. Most people prefer the comfortable slavery of social conditioning, the warm bath of conformity, the easy path of reflexive emotional display. And that's fine. The world needs followers. It needs people who telegraph their moves, who can be easily read, who are predictable and manageable. But if you're still reading this, if something in these words has hooked the part of you that knows you're capable of more, then you're confronting a choice. You can continue moving through public space like a child, broadcasting your interior chaos, giving away your power in 1,000 small surrenders. Or you can begin the brutal work of becoming sovereign over your own presentation, deliberate about what you reveal, strategic about when and how you deploy your truth. This transformation requires killing parts of yourself, not the essential self, but the weak self, the self that needs constant validation, the self that treats strangers like therapists, the self that apologizes for existing, the self that explains when it should declare. These are not authentic parts of you. They're trauma responses, conditioning, the accumulated debris of a society that benefits from your weakness. The sovereign you're becoming doesn't emerge from addition, from adding new habits or techniques. It emerges from subtraction, from stripping away everything that doesn't serve your elevation. Every reflexive apology you swallow, every complaint you transmute into internal problem-solving, every display of desperation you redirect into patient accumulation of options, every explanation you replace with silence or declaration. This is lonely work, The people who benefited from your weakness will resist your transformation. They'll call you fake, calculating, cold. They'll miss the version of you that was easy to read, easy to manipulate, easy to use. They'll invoke authenticity as a weapon to pull you back into performative weakness. They'll tell you that you've changed, and they'll mean it as an accusation. Let them. Their comfort with your weakness is not your responsibility. Their inability to recognize that strength can be authentic is their limitation, not yours. The sovereign doesn't require permission to become sovereign. He doesn't need the masses to understand the architecture of his power. He simply builds, implements, enforces. Here's what they won't tell you. The loneliness isn't permanent. As you develop sovereignty, as you stop leaking power through public display of weakness, something shifts. You begin attracting a different caliber of relationship, people who respect strength, people who value discretion, people who understand that depth doesn't require constant display. The quality of your relationships improves even as the quantity might temporarily decline. This is the paradox of sovereign development. You become more genuine by being more strategic. You become more trustworthy by being more selective with your trust. You become more powerful by conserving energy rather than scattering it. What looks like coldness from outside is actually heat focused to such intensity that it cuts rather than warms. The Stoics called this premeditatio malorum, the premeditation of evils. Before entering any public situation, the sovereign considers what could go wrong, what vulnerabilities might be exposed, what information might be extracted, not from paranoia, but from strategic awareness. He enters every interaction having already thought through the consequences of various revelations, the strategic value of various displays, the optimal allocation of his authentic self. This becomes second nature. The conscious calculation fades into intuitive wisdom. You develop a sense for what serves and what sabotages. You learn to read rooms, to calibrate presentation to context, to move through public space like a predator rather than prey. Not aggressive, not dominating, but alert, prepared, sovereign over your own image and impact. And here's the beautiful part. Once you stop bleeding power through public display of weakness, that power accumulates. It builds. You become a more effective friend because you're not draining your intimates with the same problems you're broadcasting to strangers. You become a more dangerous adversary because they can't read you, can't predict you, can't use your emotional displays against you. You become more attractive because scarcity, real scarcity, not performed scarcity, draws attention. But the cost is permanent vigilance. The sovereign never fully relaxes in public space. There's always a part of him watching, calculating, managing the presentation. The public mask becomes comfortable but never automatic. You don't get to zone out, to operate on autopilot, to just react. Every moment is a choice about what you're building or destroying with your presentation. Most people will never accept this cost. They'll read these words, feel momentarily inspired, then return to their patterns of public weakness. They'll complain to the barista, they'll overshare with co-workers, they'll seek validation from strangers, they'll apologize for existing, and they'll wonder why power continues to elude them, why respect feels so fragile, why they can't seem to translate their good intentions into concrete results. You're different, or you want to be. The fact that you've read this far means something in you recognizes the architecture being described. Something in you knows you've been leaking power, knows you've been strategically incompetent, knows there's a better way to move through the world. That recognition is the seed. What grows from it depends entirely on whether you're willing to do the brutal work of cultivation. So here's your challenge. For the next 7 days, practice sovereign presentation in public space. Not perfectly. Perfection is the enemy of progress. But deliberately. Before you complain, pause. Before you explain yourself unnecessarily, pause. Before you display desperation or seek validation from strangers, pause. Notice how much energy you've been scattering. Notice how much power you've been surrendering in small moments you thought didn't matter. They matter. Every moment matters. Every interaction is either building your fortress or handing your enemies tools to dismantle it. Every public display is either accumulating respect or eroding it. There is no neutral ground. You're always moving towards sovereignty or away from it. And if you're serious about this path, if you want to continue developing the skills of strategic presentation and sovereign power, then subscribe. Not because you'll get entertainment, you'll get training. Not because you'll feel good, you'll feel challenged. But because transformation requires immersion, requires repeated exposure to frameworks that contradict your conditioning, requires a steady stream of reality checks against your comfortable delusions. The masses consume content for comfort. The sovereign consumes content for calibration. Which are you? The choice, as always, is yours. But choosing nothing is still a choice. It's choosing to remain exactly where you are, exactly who you've been, exactly as weak as you've always been. And I promise you this: the world is not waiting for you to get comfortable with your power. It's using your hesitation against you right now, in this moment, in every public interaction where you continue to display the weakness you've finally recognized. Stop displaying it. Start building. The sovereign you're becoming is waiting on the other side of this discomfort. All you have to do is refuse to look away from what you've been doing wrong, refuse to return to comfortable weakness, and refuse to settle for anything less than complete sovereignty over your public presentation. The path is clear, the choice is yours, and the clock is ticking. Would you like me to adjust the tone to be slightly harsher or softer, or would you prefer a different philosophical angle woven throughout?